How would you like a 15% discount to my daily email, the stack of stuff, the show notes, discounts to the conference, all of that? All you need to do is text the word show to 33777. You'll get the annual subscription with a 15% discount to my daily email. You'll get the stack of stuff, the links to the show notes, discounts to the conference, and so much more. All you have to do is text the word show, SHOW, to 33777. Text show to 33777.
Welcome to the Eric Erickson Show podcast, Hour 2.
My fellow Americans, welcome. It is Eric Erickson here across the United States. The phone number is 877-973-7425. Should you wish to be on the program. Someone has thrown a incendiary device inside a ballot box in Vancouver, Washington. Hundreds of ballots have been burned up. If you're listening out in the Vancouver, Washington area, you need to know that if you put your ballot in a drop box at the Fisher's Landing Transit Center over the weekend, that your ballot has probably been destroyed. Someone put a flammable device inside to burn up the ballots. I suppose this is the beginning of what's probably going to happen in more places. In any event, let's do as promised. I want to talk to you about the early vote, and I need to caution you up front about a couple of things. One, there are a growing number of Trump supporters who say the only way Donald Trump can lose this election is if Kamala Harris steals it. Now, I know the people say that are the same people who say that the refs cost their favorite football team their game. Doesn't matter how bad the play was. It doesn't matter how bad the game was. It's always the refs. It's always cheating. So me telling them that's not true doesn't matter. They don't care. They just say this stuff. The other thing I have to tell you is that we cannot determine a winner in most cases from the early vote. I say in most cases because we're starting to see some patterns that do suggest some issues out there. The reason you can only extrapolate so much from early voting is because, well, for example, here's the thing that's keeping the Republicans up at night. The Republicans do not know if what they are seeing in the early vote is just Election Day voters choosing to vote early, and so there's going to be no offset on Election Day. That is, if the same people vote now who voted in 2020, the odds are Kamala Harris wins. Why? Because if you poll people who voted in 2020, that we know voted in 2020, those people say they're supporting Kamala Harris. That's what's keeping the Republicans up at night. That are their Election Day voters just voting early, and there's not going to be a new wave of Trump voters on Election Day. If so, he's probably lost. But there are problems for the Democrats that are keeping them up at night. For example, for the first time in history, I started to sing out for the first time in forever, but I didn't. You can thank me later. For the first time in American history, Republicans are outpacing Democrats in Nevada early voting. In fact, John Ralston, who's a Democrat, who is not a Trump fan, is telling Democrats they have real problems in Nevada because right now the Republicans are outpacing the Democrat early vote by 5% in Nevada. If that holds, that means Democrats are going to have to win the independent vote in Nevada by a minimum of 5% and possibly more, and the polling does not suggest that it's likely. In fact, this is such a startling turn of events that Steve Daines, the chairman of the National Republican Senatorial Committee, has rushed funding to Nevada and has himself gone to Nevada to campaign with Captain Sam Brown, who's running for the United States Senate. The thinking going that if there's big momentum for the GOP nationwide, it's going to also impact Nevada. It seems to be showing up in the early vote, and that might help get Sam Brown elected. In Florida, this is a state where I can tell you the early voting means we can call a winner in Florida. You know, Florida has a problem. You go back to the year 2000, the media called Florida at 7 p.m. Eastern time when the Panhandle was still voting. And it was hugely contentious. They forgot that Florida is divided into 2 time zones. And the rule now is that no media network will call Florida until 8 p.m. Eastern time when the Panhandle closes. And I will not be surprised if at 8 o'clock and a couple seconds on election night, Florida's called for Donald Trump. Why? The early voting for Republicans in Florida is so outpacing the Democrats in Florida, it is at this point all but impossible for Democrats to mount enough voters on election day to turn the state to the Democrats. You heard me. The Republican early vote in Florida is so disproportionately huge compared to the Democrats, it's all but impossible for the Democrats to get enough people to vote on election day to overcome the Republican early vote lead. Republicans in Florida typically do not outpace Democrats by the level they're outpacing them now. It's absurd. Parts of the state that have never seen Republicans outvote Democrats in early voting are seeing Republicans outvote Democrats. Miami-Dade County has a massive Republican vote turnout. But there's one piece of data that is giving the Democrats extreme heartburn. The one piece of data that is causing Democrats to think this race may be headed to Donald Trump. And again, I must caution, we don't know. You can only interpret so much. You can only dive so far into the data. You can't really honestly extrapolate. 45 million people have voted already. Yesterday it was 42 million. As of this morning, weekend vote totals in New Jersey and elsewhere, they put us to 45 million people. Here is what is keeping the Democrats up at night. Here is what's giving the Democrats heartburn. It's not the swing states. It's not Nevada, although that concerns them. It's not Pennsylvania, although that concerns them. It's not Georgia, although that concerns them. It's all of the states that aren't in contention. It's all of the states where we already know who's going to win that state. The Californias, the New Yorks, the Illinois, the Floridas, the Alabamas, the Texases, the Oregons, the Washingtons. We know who's going to win those states. We know Kamala Harris is going to win Washington, Oregon, and California. We know Donald Trump is going to win Texas, Alabama, and Florida. We know Kamala Harris is going to win Illinois. We know Kamala Harris is going to win New York. What's keeping the Democrats up all night, what's giving the Democrats heartburn and nightmares, is that when you look at 2020 and Joe Biden's early vote and you compare it to Kamala Harris's early vote in all of those states, Kamala Harris is getting less voters on the same day. Every day that goes by, Kamala Harris and her turnout in California, Oregon, Washington, Illinois, New York, Texas, Alabama, Florida, you name it, Kamala Harris's early vote is a lower percentage of Democrats than what Joe Biden got. And if that keeps up, if that trend line continues, it's very, very possible that Donald Trump could win the popular vote. It becomes very plausible for him to do so. And that's why Democrats are concerned. Look, anyone who tells you Donald Trump is going to win California is a nut. He's not going to win California. But if Joe Biden won it with 60% and Kamala Harris only wins it with 55%, that could cost her the popular vote nationwide. That's the problem. That's the problem the Democrats have. Now, what about the other states? In Georgia, Georgia leads the states in early voting. In fact, I've reached out to the Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, in Georgia, because all the conversations people are having, all those conversations are what? That we could take 2 weeks to find out the winner. Actually, in Georgia, they've changed their procedure, including in Fulton County, which is the blight in the state when it comes to elections. And the Secretary of State, we were doing an event with Brian Kemp on Saturday, and he said, if Fulton County does what it did in the primary, it's going to have its votes counted very quickly, and we really may have a winner very quickly. In fact, Raffensperger told me, we may actually know who's won Georgia well before midnight on election night because the state has changed its procedure for counting absentee ballots. They're going to be processed very quickly. They're going to be counted very quickly, and that'll expedite who wins who we know wins the state. So I asked Raffensperger, actually, if he can come on the show. He's going to come on Wednesday and talk about how Georgia has changed its procedures. It's one of the few swing states that actually has changed its procedures. In Pennsylvania, they're doing better, but Pennsylvania hasn't globally changed its procedures. In Georgia, they have, which could really, really shake up the race. And in Georgia, over 56% of people have voted already who voted in 2020. That's extraordinary. Think about this. More than half of the people who voted in 2020 have already voted in Georgia. That's extraordinary. And in Florida, the voting just continues to pile on. Now, here's more heartburn. Here's more heartburn for the Democrats. Where are the black voters? The black vote in Georgia in early voting at this time, this is the last week of early voting. We've now got souls to polls. We've got all that. It's happened. And the black vote in Georgia is less than 30%. In a presidential election year, for perspective, the black vote in Georgia tends to be between 32 and 35% of the vote, early vote. We're at less than 30% of the early vote. The odds are, if you're a black voter and you're not voting early, like you did in the past, you're not going to vote election day. There's not going to be a shift. There tends to be with Republicans. With Democrats, not so much. With black voters, rarely. So in Georgia, the Democrats, there was a curious line in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Greg Bluestein, very good reporter at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Everybody tell Greg I just said nice things about him. Greg Bluestein, great reporter, really is. And he's got a piece in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution today where he's talking to Democrats and Republicans, and it was a very curious line. The Democrats said they're looking at 2022 to compare it to 2024. Friends, honestly, as someone who's run campaigns for a living, you talk to any Democrat and any Republican strategist who's not trying to spin you, and they'll tell you you can't look at a midterm election to gauge presidential election turnout. And if Democrats in Georgia, if their spin is we have to look to 2022, that means they're losing. Because you don't do that. Why? Because presidential election turnout is higher than midterm turnout, and midterm turnout is more party-driven, less emotionally driven. In midterms, it's based on the party in the White House, and that tends to shape it. And by the way, it turned out to be good in Georgia, with the exception of Herschel Walker. Statewide, Republicans swept. So if the Democrats are telling us we got to look at 2022 in Georgia instead of 2020 presidential turnout, that's an admission against interest that Democrats think they're going to lose in Georgia. And they're fretting in Wisconsin and in Michigan and in Pennsylvania. I'll leave you with this before we go to commercial break. Kamala Harris and Gretchen Whitmer were sitting at a bar having a beer this weekend. That's not the setup of a joke. That's a true story. They were caught on a hot mic before they realized that there was a microphone present. Kamala Harris is having a frank conversation with Gretchen Whitmer, and she says, we have a problem with men. They're not turning out at the rate we need them to be turning out. And then she turns around and says, we have cameras present. So nice to see you here, Gretchen Whitmer. Before the cameras, before the microphone, before she realizes it, she's raising a red flag about men. And I will tell you, in the early voting, yes, There's a problem for the Democrats with Democratic men are not turning out. You know how you can tell who's a Democratic man or a Republican man? How they vote in primaries. And the men who vote in Democratic primaries aren't showing up for early voting. The men who vote in Republican primaries are. And the Democrats are taking notice of that, and it's a warning sign for them. Welcome back. It is Eric Erickson here, and this is where I have to ask my listeners. And by the way, those of you on the phones, be patient. Short segment here. I will get to your phone calls in the next segment. I gotta ask my listeners for advice because I have very smart listeners, and there are. I mean, I got some of you fine, wonderful, upstanding people at NetJets listen, and others as well around the country. Y'all are all brilliant people. My 15-year-old son, I thought it was a passing interest, and it hasn't been. He has started teaching himself how to play the piano, and he has gotten really good at playing the piano. I taught myself to play the piano when I was young, but I didn't stick with it. I thought it would be a passing fad. He has just on and on. He's moved into Brahms and Chopin and Beethoven. He's gotten super interested in classical music. And he's on his mom's piano, and it was poorly kept when my wife was in college. They're dead keys. It keeps going out of tune quickly. His heart is set on a Steinway. Now, I know how much a new Steinway costs. I cannot afford that without selling both my kidneys and then some. However, I also know there are different businesses that sell used Steinways, and some of them very reasonable, like very low 5 figures or upper 4 figures, and they're Steinways. They'll last forever, but it's estate sales and stuff like that. If anybody has any ideas, it's got to be an upright. We don't have room for a grand piano in our house. We're looking at Yamahas. He really wants a Steinway. I am absolutely clueless. He's not going to listen to my program, so he has no idea I'm discussing this. I'm thinking a Christmas present. I am stunned at his skill teaching himself to play the piano, and it would be a great reward. But we're definitely in the market for a new upright piano. So anybody have any advice? Eric at ewerickson.com, ERICK at ewerickson.com. I would very much appreciate any advice any of you smart listeners have about buying pianos. Now, I have to tell you about Hillsdale College. You would be smart to go there too. Eric, ERICK, Eric for Hillsdale.com. Here's why. Hillsdale College has been around since the 1800s. Part of Hillsdale College's mission has always been to educate Americans wherever they are in their walk of life. It's one of the reasons Hillsdale was one of the very first institutions in this country to desegregate. They have been educating Americans wherever they are in all walks of life since the 1800s, mostly with lots of free products, including Imprimus and their podcast network, and Larry Arndt's lectures on the Constitution, and Victor Davis Hanson's lectures on citizenship. And right now, you can even get a free pocket Constitution and Declaration of Independence. All you have to do is go to ericforhillsdale.com. It's ERICK, ericforhillsdale.com. If you go to ericforhillsdale.com today, you can sign up, get the pocket Constitution, get Imprimus for free, start a relationship with Hillsdale College at ericforhillsdale.com today. Welcome. It is Eric Erickson. Okay. All right, I think I got all the emails. Apparently, there's a place in Atlanta called Cooper Piano, and I have now had, in fact, a lady emailed me from a Chamber of Commerce. She was emailer 3. I'm now at 20 some odd emails, all saying, go talk to this man at Cooper Piano. So there we have it. I think I have my answer. I knew you guys would help. And the number of people who said reached out to colleges and universities who often sell their pianos. I'm pretty sure I can't afford a Steinway for my kid. But you know what? I have always thought my parents did this to me. By the way, welcome. It's Eric Erickson here. Just randomly, this is call off the dogs. I've got a billion emails from people about pianos. When I was a kid, my parents, God bless them, if I was super interested in something, they encouraged my interest. It was a very Montessori aspect. And I feel that way with my son. And I did have this talk with him. So what he wanted for Christmas is his birthday and Christmas come together. And we have a rule in our house. My wife's birthday is the middle of December, followed by Christmas. My son's is the beginning of December. We have this rule that you get separate presents. You don't get one combined gift. You have to have two gifts, one for birthday, one for Christmas. And my son was like, Dad, what I really, really want is I want to go to Las Vegas and I want to go see a Golden Knights hockey game. He's really gotten into hockey. And he's like, and that can be a combined present, but we really need a new piano. I love playing the piano, and our piano has dead keys now. The tuner came. They're going to come back. They're not sure they can fix it, and he really wants to play piano. I was like, okay, listen, kid, if I'm going to invest in a piano, I'm going to start making you play when you decide you're tired of playing. You're still going to have to play because this isn't a long-haul investment. He's like, deal. And I don't think you'll give it up. So in any event, thank you all for the emails. My gosh, have I gotten a ton of emails from people, and pretty much everyone recommending the same thing. Now, phone number here, 877-973-7425. Hang on one second. My kid is at the door. It is locked. I gotta get my CFO to walk down the hall to unlock the door. Now I can talk to you about other stuff. How about that? Sorry, we got pianos. Hey, it's not election stuff. I'm as bored as everybody else talking about the election, and we gotta move on to really important stuff that we have not given great attention to here. Let's talk about the North Koreans. There's a shiny, happy topic, huh? It turns out the North Koreans are now really, truly in Russia, helping the Russians fight. The North Koreans have not crossed into Ukraine. As far as we know, based on intelligence, although Zelensky says it's coming. Now, for those of you who say Zelensky's a liar, Volodymyr Zelensky told everyone the North Koreans were in Russia, and everyone said, that's not true, that's not true, you're lying, you're trying to get military support for Ukraine. Turns out he was telling the truth. Now he says their intelligence has the North Koreans moving into Ukraine this week. Everyone again is saying, you're lying, you're lying, you're lying, you're lying. He was right about the last one. I don't know that he's wrong about this one. What I do know is this is a pretty significant escalation. If you've got the North Koreans helping the Russians, and by the way, where they are helping the Russians right now is the area where Ukraine moved into Russia. And you can say the Ukrainians provoked this, but the reality is that the Ukrainians were already dealing with North Korean and Iranian technology. This hasn't gotten a lot of reporting in the Western press, but Iranian and North Korean missiles and drones have been being used by the Russians because of American sanctions on Russia. They're slower to they're slower to produce their own weaponry, so they have been buying from North Korea. They've been buying from Iran. And now the North Koreans are in Russia. Here's a point for you as well. The Chinese and the North Koreans, by the way, there's proof of the Chinese helping the Russians as well near the front lines. But the Chinese and the North Koreans right now aren't battle hardened. And that's something that I think you need to process and understand here. The American military has been at war for quite some time. Many of our soldiers have been in active duty and in combat. The North Koreans and the Chinese, not so much. The North Korean war footing since the end of the Korean War has not really been significant. And practice simulations versus real war, live fire, are very different things. Now the North Koreans going to Russia to get actual military experience on the battlefield is going to make their soldiers better. At a time, the North Koreans have said they're ready to expand a war footing against South Korea. Things are getting more dangerous in Ukraine as a result. if the North Koreans go into Ukraine, which they're probably going to do, they're going to get field experience against American weaponry and European tactics. And that's going to help them with the Chinese. I need to paint this picture for you because this is happening on Joe Biden's watch. The Chinese, the Russians, and the Iranians are right now in Venezuela. It doesn't get media coverage, but it's true. Y'all, I need you to understand, I'm not making this up. This is a true story here. The Venezuelans are suffering economically. And what do dictators tend to do when they suffer economically? They tend to launch wars. By the way, another proof that Donald Trump isn't a dictator, he never launched wars. First American president not to instigate military activity as president since World War II. There is a region in Guyana next door to Venezuela. The Venezuelans had a referendum on invading this territory, and it overwhelmingly passed. And now they're on the borderland between Venezuela and Guyana. The Iranian Navy, the Chinese Navy, and the Russian Navy are helping the Venezuelans. By the way, not too far south of Haiti, which is collapsing. The Chinese and the Russian militaries have also visited Cuba. We have an Eastern Axis that is beginning to train together. The Americans, the British, the French, the Canadians, and the Australians and the New Zealanders have been training together for quite some time. This is the first time the Chinese, the North Koreans, the Iranians, and the Russians have been training together. And the North Koreans and some Chinese are doing it in live-fire military exercises in Ukraine. They're beginning to collaborate together. And then there's the Houthi. We just had a French-American-British excursion to blow up the Houthis in Yemen, but we didn't do too much. We only targeted certain aspects. Now, the reason that this is important is because when Donald Trump was president, he labeled the Houthis a terrorist regime and cut their access to bank accounts around the world, and Joe Biden got rid of that and allowed the Houthi to start collecting money again. The Houthi have used their money to arm, to wage war against the Saudis and also now against the Israelis and against the shipping in the Red Sea. These are very dangerous times we live in, and it's all thanks to Joe Biden, frankly. But there's a side aspect of this. This is one of my major reservations about J.D. Vance. And again, I like Vance. He's a nice guy. He's a funny guy. You see him in these interviews. He's clearly the future. The guy is so relaxed and at ease with himself and with others. But he's wrong on Ukraine. And I understand his background. And he can say, well, you were never in the military, I was. But that's the point. I don't want my son or my daughter to have to kill the bad guys. I would prefer that the Ukrainians kill the bad guys. And the Russians and the North Koreans are the bad guys. There will be no accommodation with the Russians. Let me tell you, the school of thought around those who whisper J.D. Vance's ear is that the Russians want to be part of the West. And right now they're looking to the Chinese because they feel like we've turned our backs on them. And the Russians would gladly come home to us if we just opened the door to them. And that's not true. That's wishful thinking by our experts who are as wrong as the left's experts. How do I know this? Because I've listened to Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin doesn't want to be in the East and he doesn't want to be in the West. He wants a Russian sphere of influence. And he believes that the Russian sphere of influence is dominant to a Western sphere of influence. He doesn't want to be part of the West. He wants to be an expanded Russian empire again. He has delusions of restoring Catherine the Great and Peter the Great's empires. And if he's got to collaborate with the Chinese and the Iranians and the North Koreans to do it, he'll do it. He views the West as sclerotic, lazy, and bad. He doesn't want to be part of the West. He wants to beat the West. And he really does believe, Vladimir Putin's convinced that if he and the Chinese, the North Koreans and the Iranians can beat the West, that Russian cultural importance is so much superior to the others that he'll wind up leading this Eastern Axis, not the Chinese. You're either going to have your money go to Ukraine so the Ukrainians can kill the Russians, or your sons and daughters are going to wind up killing the Russians and the Chinese and the North Koreans and the Iranians and the Venezuelans and all their allies. That's what this boils down to. There will either be American leadership in the world or not. And if there's not American leadership in the world, the Chinese and the Russians are going to take it for themselves. And there are some of you who are isolationists who think that's no big deal. It's not a big deal. The problem here is this. The entire world trades in American dollars. If you stop trading in American dollars, you're going to trade in another currency. And when you do, the American cost to trade is going to go up because we have direct conversion of our currency. If we have to trade in Chinese currency, we got to convert it to Chinese currency to do trades on the world market. That drives up our costs. World trade is predominated by American leadership. We get off the world stage, our costs to trade go up. All of our costs go up. You think that what we have right now is inflation? We have benefited by having American leadership in the world. At the microeconomic level, you people may be hurting fiscally. Socially, you may be hurting. Your groceries are high. But at the macroeconomic level, the United States is doing better than every other country. And the reason is because we lead the world. When we don't lead the world, we're going to look like Britain and these other countries that used to lead the world, where their costs are high, inflation is high. It's going to be bad. We either need to help the Ukrainians kill the Russians and North Koreans, or we need to be prepared to kill them ourselves because it'll come. You can think we can sit it out. We can't sit it out. War is going to find us. Joe Biden has destabilized the world. Donald Trump, that's another selling point for Trump. We didn't have all this chaos when Trump was president. I'm concerned about what happens with Ukraine, though, because there will be spillover effects if we walk away from them. Just as there are spillover effects in the Middle East, because the whole world sees Joe Biden walking away from Israel. These things have a way of working themselves out against us if we're not willing to lead. So I hope we will be willing to lead. One of the great leaders of the conservative movement of this country is Americans for Prosperity, and they'd love to have you on their team. They've got chapters in every state. You go to americansforprosperity.org/volunteer today, americansforprosperity.org/volunteer. Go sign up with AFP, and they can train you to be a very effective conservative activist fighting for common sense conservative solutions around the world. Americans for Prosperity is great at this. They teach you how to knock on doors. They teach you how to go to your local government. They teach you how to go to your state government. They teach you how to be the most informed member of your circle of friends. And again, they've got chapters in almost every state. They do events around the states where they bring people in, their volunteers in, their staff, their activists, their all the people who've signed up with them at americansforprosperity.org/volunteer. And you get to meet key leaders and thought leaders. You get to meet the people who advance the ideas for free markets and families, for school choice, and for other common sense conservative solutions. They'd love to have you on their team. Reach out to them. americansforprosperity.org/volunteer. I'm actually doing an event in Utah with AFP in December. They're good people. They'd love to have you involved. americansforprosperity.org/volunteer. Go check them out today. Hello, welcome. It is Eric Erickson here. The phone number is 877-973-7425. I want to go to John in Springfield, Ohio.
Yeah.
Welcome.
How are you?
Great. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. I heard you talking about the North Koreans and them going into the Ukraine to battle, and they have neither them nor the Chinese have seen any action since World War II. They have not a clue as to what they're going to see, what those people, how they will react, or anything else. Much like when I was in the military here in the United States 50 years ago, I had no clue as to how I would react if I was to go into battle, and I never wanted to find out. But these guys, they're going to find out, and they may chicken out. The majority of them, you never know. And if you're concerned about what happened with them and the South Koreans, they had a lot of ROK Koreans, or Royal Republic of Korea Marines in Vietnam, and I wouldn't be surprised if they've been in some of the other places that we've been as well. So they probably have soldiers that are, in fact, still trained and know what combat is.
Yeah, my real concern here, John, you make great points, is that The North Koreans now and the Chinese are starting to get military experience by working with the Russians in Ukraine. It's almost like a real live training ground for them, and they can take those skills back home. And we've got it. We're one of the very few countries on the planet right now with a military that actually has a serious active duty military combat experience, other than the Russians and the Ukrainians now. And so now it's starting to spread, and that just makes it a more and more dangerous situation for us. And I don't want our kids to have to fight the bad guys. I would prefer that our proxies do it for our sons and daughters. And that's why I've just got all these concerns right now. I see where this stuff is headed, and it just doesn't look good. In any event, look, I am happy to take your phone calls, 877-973-7425. But when we come back, I do want to talk about the election a little more generally, what my gut is telling me. My gut can be wrong. Your gut can be wrong. But when I hear something like this from Kamala Harris...
Madam Vice President, can you give us a sense of your internal polling at the campaign and how that is making or influencing your decisions on what to do over the next 9 days?
So, to be very frank with you, my internal polling is my instinct. I let the campaign people deal with all that other stuff. And I am responding to what I'm seeing. If you see the people showing up last night, every event that we do, and the feeling is one of energy and excitement.
I'm sorry, but when you're telling me that your internal polling is your instinct and your Kamala Harris, that tells me a whole lot. So when we come back, I'll give you my frank views of where this thing is. We are 8 days from a presidential election, and it really is up for grabs. I don't know that you all appreciate how tied this race is, and little bitty things like Hinchcliffe on stage at the Trump event can matter. So let's have a frank discussion. I'll tell you exactly what I think. I'm willing to lay it all on the line for you and tell you where I see this thing headed in 8 days.